The whole time you're speaking, Tana, I can't help but think about everybody in our audience that may have a loved one or a friend that's dealing with either cancer or some type of illness or depression. Dee, as you were sharing, I have a dear friend of mine that actually this morning is getting a biopsy and they're concerned that he has cancer. And I would love to be able to just share with him your thoughts. If you had 3 non-negotiables when it comes to building resilience, what would you say, Tana, that you found incredibly helpful for you to build that grit, to build that resilience in your own life?
So some of it happened before I even realized it. But I mean, now that I am, married husband, there's so much more intention behind it. But I'm going to tell you the things that I realized and that I didn't even know I was doing to get through that. And that now it's part of our program. So a couple of things. When I met my husband, he wanted me to start telling my story right away. And I'm like, absolutely not. That's never going to happen. People would hate me, number one. My daughter is too young. This is never going to happen. Like, why? Why would I do that anyways? My life was garden variety dysfunctional. It's not as bad as other people's lives. Why would I bother telling my story? Other people have it much worse. Now, that sounds like I'm just blowing it off, but believe it or not, that's one of the things that resilient people do. Resilient people realize that stuff happens to everyone. I didn't recognize that. That's what I was doing. They realized things happen to everyone. Stuff happens. And they have this tendency to look at their own lives in relationship to how bad other people have it. Mm. So no matter how bad it is, it's like, so what? I mean, it was like Jerry Springer material, but it's garden variety dysfunctional. That's me minimizing it. That's how I survived it. So believe it or not, that sounds like it's a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Being able to put it in perspective and go, my life's not as bad as other people is a way. Another way of saying that is like where your attention goes, your energy flows, right? So being able to say it's not that bad, even though it's terrible, and being able to start to focus on what is positive is how you move forward. Mm. So that is actually part of what we would recommend for people. And the mindset portion, we would also recommend, that your brain is healthy and that your hormones are healthy, right? That's the biological portion. So we do everything in 4 circles. Biology, are your hormones okay? Do you have a head trauma? We want to make sure you're thinking clearly, that you're able to think clearly because everything's working right. But then there's the psychology, and that's what we're talking about now, right? So the psychology is stuff happens, change your mindset, where your attention goes, your energy flows. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on the right things. And then there's the social component, who you hang out with matters. Mm-hmm. When my life was not good, I can tell you right now, I was not hanging out with people I should have been hanging out with, right? When my life started to get better, and it's all in my book, my social circle was completely different because people are contagious. Mm-hmm. So, and people are like, well, I can get better, but I can still continue to keep this foot in over here and keep these friends. Good luck with that. Let me know how that works out. It doesn't mean you can't love them, but to continue to do old behavior and think you're going to get a different outcome is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And then I think the last one is a question that we ask people. We want them to plant it firmly in their head. Then what? If I do this, then what? Because your behavior matters, right? So then what? Mm-hmm. So if I do this behavior, then what's going to follow? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it another way of saying it? Is this good for me or is this bad for me? So then what? If I do this, then what? And then that's the last one in the social circle and the psychological circle. And then the very last thing is spiritual. Purposeful people live 11 years longer. They get up and do what they need to do even when they don't want to, because it's not about them. And that is the number one thing from my past, when I was so angry and I was so angry at God, if there was one, and thought he didn't love me. And why would you ever even allow me to stay on the planet and waste oxygen? This is just stupid. How could I possibly have known I would need to go through those things to be able to have the empathy, the insight, and the strength to do what I'm doing now, to help my nieces, to help other people? It's the entire foundation of what I do now. So it's pain to purpose. So I think resilient people use pain to purpose.
Tana, you said that earlier. I couldn't help but think of the book by Henry Nouwen called The Wounded Healer, right? Mm-hmm. This idea of being wounded, but using that pain for purpose, right? Yeah. And I would love to hear from you this writing process. We can't wait to read your new book. What was it like for you in writing this new book? The process Yeah.
It was hard. It was hard because it was hard for me to make the decision to write it. I had to wait till my daughter was at an age where I felt like she was mature enough to, because there are critics no matter what. Right. There are critics no matter what you do, you're going to have a critic somewhere. And so it's like, I wanted her to understand fully. And then writing it was difficult because literally you're just very exposed. You're putting the best and the worst of you out there for everyone to critique and to comment on. So that was not an easy thing to do. And also digging into all the old stuff. I'm like, I did therapy. Why am I doing this again? I don't want to do this again. I don't want to relive this again. So that wasn't a super easy thing to do. There were parts of it that I got stuck on, and there were parts that I hired a writer for because I kept getting stuck in the weeds. I could write it all, but it's like, oh, I'm just like getting stuck in this negative loop when I go back to some of those times, and he helped sort of like move it along.
Right.
It was not an easy thing to do, but it was cathartic.
But what you said earlier about sharing your story is really a profound tenet that we really need to follow, principle that we need to learn to have the courage to share our story. And I think
divided. And I had this moment right after I got my book deal that I decided I wasn't going to write it. So I'm like, I don't want to do this. I was with Daniel. He was speaking at the John Maxwell event. And, my husband's like this rock star psychiatrist and all these people are crowded around him. And so I was just waiting over to the side and I was very proud of him. It was a huge event. And this woman walked up to me and she was from some country in Africa. I don't remember exactly where she was from. And she had a pretty heavy accent and she came over and she said, I was hoping I'd see you here. And I said, I thought she meant as in we. She was hoping she'd see us there. And so I said, oh, and I just started talking to her about what we do. And she's like, no, I was hoping I would see you. And I was like, okay. And she said, ever since you've written the first thing about your life, I've been following you. I listened to your podcast because of your story. And she didn't know even a quarter of not even a tenth of my story because I hadn't told anyone most of it. So when she said that, she started crying. And she said, I pray every day because I say, if God can do this for her, he can do it for me. Give me the strength to do what she did. And I'm like, okay, so this book isn't just about me. Once again, it's God saying, this isn't about you. This really has very little to do with you. This has to do with something much bigger than you. So if I get the criticism, that's okay. Because if a couple people read it and it's what they needed to hear at the time.
Oh, we love it. And we're so thankful. So thankful for your courage, Tana, in actually sharing your story.